How's everyone doing?
Hi, I am Jaycen Horton. I am one of the co-founders at Nori. Thank you. I am also on the engineering team, product team at Nori. Nori is building a carbon removal marketplace. So we are working with farmers who are storing carbon in soil. And then we certify that carbon removal, put it on chain, and then we allow buyers to purchase and retire those carbon removal certificates via also the blockchain.
And I'm Jose, and I am here on behalf of the Clean NFTs movement, if you will. I'm representing a lot of different folks in the space. We've got the gamut from artists, developers, collectors, and everyone in between. And I'm just here to kind of represent the average person who's interested in this, and just want to make sure that this discussion is still continuing, along with all the other hype and amazing things that are happening in the space. And then Tom, who couldn't be here today, is actually out in Cartagena working on a collaboration with a mangrove restoration project. But he's got a project as well where he's connecting NFTs to carbon neutrality and carbon removal.
Cool. Yeah. So I spoke a little bit already about what Nori does, but to get a little bit deeper into it, really what Nori is trying to achieve and how it relates to this conference is that we're trying to take the concept that there are, in the case of NFTs, NFTs have a large footprint associated with them. What we're trying to do is create another NFT that is effectively linkable back and forth to the NFTs that are minted or for other transactions in the real world. We're trying to take that controversial idea that the blockchain has some large footprint associated with it, and try to erase that idea. So we've worked with several different platforms like BitBasil, Blindboxes, the Sandbox, where artists and creators and other users of the blockchain can remove the entire footprint of a NFT mint. If people aren't curious, or if people don't know how or what the footprint really looks like for a NFT, you can go to, on my personal site, I actually have at jaycen.io/eth-footprint. You can plug in an Ethereum address, you can put in a date range, and it'll give you, spit out the footprint associated with that address. And you'll see that there's often several tons worth of carbon being emitted per these transactions. Now, I think what we'll do here is we'll talk a little bit about sort of just the history of how that's evolved through time. Yeah, you want to talk about some of your research?
Sure. So I don't know who's familiar with kind of how we got to this point with the narrative around the conversation. I sort of jumped in January, specifically around this narrative. I've been into NFTs prior to that, but what got me into this was that during sort of this peak in January, there was an artist who put out a blog post and was using a calculator to kind of show the emissions of NFTs. A lot of these things were happening in discussions with other artists. We were debating kind of like the way that you calculate these things, and we actually kind of formed a group on Discord. And there were other folks as well. Art Gnome had green NFTs, so we had like lots of other different groups that were working towards finding solutions. The reason I jumped in was early on, there wasn't really a lot of resources that were directing folks to proof of stake or other types of platforms that were actually available at the time. Everything was pointing towards Ethereum platforms only. All those resources that were available, all the advice that was being given out was just on kind of the platforms that we all know, the huge ones. I jumped in specifically to help with, as just a normal person, figuring out how can we educate around this topic, how can we come together. But I've done a little bit of research. I read all the articles from December through April that talk, about this topic, about the environment or the impact. I think it was like 233 articles I read through. And from what I found, only 1/6 of those articles really ever touched on proof of stake blockchains, and probably less than that, was actually spent really in depth talking about these platforms. A lot of it was just like one sentence about ETH2 or, or maybe a Tezos or something like that. So a lot of misreporting, a lot of FUD, and I think we have a chance to kind of like move that discussion forward and keep it going.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic too. It can be quite controversial with like the ways, for instance, that you can calculate the footprint of each of the different blockchains. A lot of the articles and a lot of the research papers out there often sort like a Digiconomist source from like 2017 or maybe even earlier than that. And at the end of the day, like who actually is responsible for the footprint of these transactions, right? Is it the creator? Is it the person who's purchasing it, who's creating that demand? Is it the miner? Is it something else?
The platform even.
Yeah. And so, I think Jose's done some fantastic work curating like a list of some of these different platforms. But one thing I'll ask is it enough to be carbon neutral? So let's say we switch from this traditionally proof of work to proof of stake chain, be it Ethereum 2.0, be it some alternative blockchain. I'll ask, is it enough to just be carbon neutral?
Yeah, so again, I represent a group with lots of different varying opinions. There's no way I can really speak for everyone. Me personally, I'm an optimist, so even though I still use Ethereum for certain things, there's certain communities, friends that I want to support, and that's where they're minting. There's certain dApps that, quite honestly, if there's any folks out there developing on proof of stake, just look at these dApps for inspiration and then build that utility on a different blockchain so I can use that service, right? As far as if that's enough, I feel like it's a good start. Once ETH 2.0 does happen and everything's now kind of proof of stake or some other consensus mechanism that's not proof of work, then we're at this starting line. Like for me, that's where you start, and I think there's so much more that can be done to at the chain level, at the validator level, at the artists and collectors and platforms, where this conversation can kind of actually start happening, and we can show that in this industry. We actually have data to sift through because everything's on chain, whereas in other industries, it's like a black box. You're never going to know how much of a footprint the gaming industry or fashion or something else is really taking up because they're not going to give you those numbers, and they don't really exist if you look at research reports.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that can be a little annoying is sort of like scrolling through Twitter and just seeing a lot of like aggressive tweets that are about how the blockchain is not, it's not friendly to the environment. I would love to see a future where not only do we switch from proof of work to something that's a little bit better on the environment, like a proof of stake blockchain, but I would like to see it taken a step further and see like everything that happens on chain actually be carbon negative. What if in the future, let's say, Nori's built on Ethereum, so let's say Ethereum switches to proof of stake, and we go beyond that, and we invest the money to remove the carbon of all of the transactions and NFT mints and all of the different types of transactions since day one, and make that chain actually carbon negative. I wonder if then the aggression settles.
I sure hope so. I mean, because again, this is if we can do that, and I don't see why we can't. Like with all the innovation and all this technology, I don't see why we couldn't start working on that. But I also think it has to be fun. The conversation has to be fun, exciting. If there's controversy, then let's bring it forward. Bring all the critics. Let's have a debate, right? I challenge anyone who's on Twitter writing these long threads about whatever they want to talk about. Just instead of blocking anyone that has an NFT in their bio, let's actually have a discussion, right? And so the reason I say that is because this is a chance where we can actually see the impact that's happening because it's on chain. And then towards the future, I think if we had an ability to connect the same way we have like game streamers or people who are like in those like entertainment realms that folks are or YouTubers, right? Why not invest in on the ground efforts where people can actually connect with the folks that are doing that work, restoration or conservancy or whatever, and have a stronger connection to those organizations that that we're helping out. That way, it becomes more of a you have a stronger connection to the causes that you care about, and everyone is actually benefiting from it. The artists, the platforms, the causes themselves, and then it's this like virtuous cycle. So I can speak on this one. So this is a little bit of information about clean NFTs. On the side of the screen here, you can see the spreadsheet. So this started out as a, honestly, it was an experiment. It was an open spreadsheet community document where in the early days, and I think in like beginning of February, in our Discord, it was just like, hey, if you see a platform out there, or if you are a developer, just add it to the list, right? And then, I mean, this isn't even the full list, but the trend is things are moving towards proof of stake and other consensus mechanisms, and L2s and stuff like that. So at some point, I'll develop this into a website. If anyone out there wants to help with that, please reach out. Because I think the easier this data is to look at and to understand, the better choices people can make for themselves and when they're collecting or minting.
I'd love to see a resource that's akin to this one, but actually also like maybe extending it to the different types of ways to calculate the carbon footprint of the different transactions that happen on chain. I think one of the missing links still is that there isn't really a standard for calculating any of these things. So I touched on it a little bit earlier, but until we actually have a feasible way to know who is responsible and how much footprint is actually created, we're sort of like having to pick our favorite calculation tool. We're trying to figure out what is the footprint of the miner, for instance, and then you divide that by like the NFTs gas or storage costs for some mint. But what does the future of this look like, do you think?
I think it's honestly it's going to take everyone. Like I said, we and that includes critics and people like that, because I think their perspective is important, so long as they actually want to contribute to building this with us. Because if not, then okay, then what are you doing? Like what's the point of the critique then? But that's exactly what is happening in our Discord. Is we have folks who are artists who are skeptical, but they're also data researchers and they work with data as artists. And so and then folks like you and other people that are actually in the carbon space who we're having these discussions about, like, okay, how do we calculate? How do we figure out, can you calculate the impact of one NFT versus a whole, block of transactions? Like all these kinds of things. I think education is important to kind of make sure that not just our space, the artists working in this space and everyone, but the people who don't have a clue about what's happening, or the people who are spreading FUD about it, to really understand the nuance that's missing in a lot of these headlines and things like that.
Yeah, I'll also say that if we could settle on a standard for let's say proof of stake becomes the standard de facto for blockchains, and then in addition to that we settle on some standard for calculating the footprint of blockchain transactions, then we can take it a step further and we can start to automate the whole thing. What if we start to create chains that are just intrinsically carbon negative? What if every transaction requires some purchase of carbon removal, or maybe that's much further down the road once there's enough supply to actually do something like that. But what if we started to create those incentives today? What if different platforms for NFT minting or NFT drops or sales or secondary markets start to allow people to like tick a box that says, I want this NFT that I'm creating and selling to have some carbon removal attached to it. I think at that point, then you can start to, actually, I don't know, it gives me a deeper sense of comfort to know that the thing that I'm purchasing or the thing that I'm, creating more incentives around actually is not creating worse things in the world.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And what came to mind was, again, the green NFTs hackathon that happened. Shout out to Jaycen and everyone involved in that project. Initiatives like that really help bring together people who can, people who would otherwise be making a dApp around some other kind of, service or something a little bit maybe more fun and exciting. But there were some projects in there that kind of helped to create visual indicators of like, oh, this NFT, is removing carbon, or this NFT, or I forget the name of the project specifically, but I think something like that too, creating symbols or creating a language around it or creating a visual language, so that when you're on a platform, you can see that with the badge or something like that. I mean, there are platforms coming out. I work for one that is allowing you to actually on-chain track the impact that you're having. And I feel like that's just a trend that I want to keep seeing in the space. And then again, this is, so Tom, who couldn't be here, this is his project here. And this is another idea where you can actually tie the climate and the creatures that live in the climate, in the environment, to the NFTs that you're purchasing here. I think that the more that this can happen with that verified impact in the real world, that's what's going to make the change, because people can then see what's happening as opposed to in Web 2 and other like traditional ways where you might be giving to a charity or something like that. You don't know where that money goes to. That could go to the gala that that nonprofit is having for their sponsors. But I think we actually have a chance to get closer to that impact and actually own it the same way that we own like collectibles, right? Why not actually own the impact or the change that you want to see happen?
Yeah, I think we have the tools today to create these types of social impact, carbon negative, or at minimum carbon offset transactions, so that you can make these things neutral. And a wallet on Ethereum with your NFT profile is effectively your social. It is your social identity for the blockchain. So starting to attach these badges, not just to the artwork, but you can see inside of these social profiles that individuals or companies or whoever else has taken the right steps, the available tools that are there today, use them, and taken the right steps to actually make an impact rather than making something a little bit worse beyond just the art created.
And I'll add to that. So I don't know if you know this guy. His name is Vitalik. If you read his blog and some of his interviews, he talks about legitimacy and how do you legitimize things that most people look at as this speculative gambling and what have you. And he talks about specifically with NFTs, if you can connect that to some kind of social good, to some kind of verified impact, that's going to legitimize your purchase, and that's going to legitimize the whole space, right? And so I would just argue the same case is if we can take that same mentality and make sure that the projects we're building, and it is happening, people, PFPs, Bored Apes, Cool Cats, have verified on-chain donations. I think that's a great start. I feel like it'd be cool to see a continued effort at something that's like, where now that the culture around that NFT project, around that community, they're super on board, right? It's not just one donation. It's like this is part of like if we're apes, like we're actually out, we're like flying over there and like we're donating our time, and then it just becomes ingrained with the culture of the project or something like that.
Yeah, speaking of that, like it's starting with the concept of a wallet being a social profile. Now we're talking a little bit about like communities and how communities as wholes can actually have social impact as well. What do you think is next for communities of impact?
Good question. Honestly, I would like to see everyone come together around this. There are a lot of existing communities, like there's the Clean NFT community. There's several different chains that have spurred their own communities. There's several different platforms that have folks that are really interested in clean NFTs. That's our kind of like tag around it, but you can call it whatever you want. And then there's also DAOs. There's EcoDAO on Ethereum, KlimaDAO. There's ArtTezTik on Tezos. There's Open Forest Protocol on Near. There's so many different groups, and we're all kind of approaching this from different angles. But this is an open invite. Like, let's all just like get together and do some Twitter Spaces or some whatever it takes, so that we can all kind of get on a similar page and multiply our efforts in this way.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue to the fact that Nori is actually hiring a community manager. So if you go to nori.com/climate-NFT, you will find more information about this. The climate-NFT, you'll find more information about a climate or a carbon negative drop for creators and buyers of the collectors of the climate NFTs. So if you're an artist and you want to get involved with something like this, go to nori.com/climate-NFT and you can read more about that. You can contribute art. If you're a collector, reach out as well. There's some information on that page that will allow you to get notified when we're ready to do the climate or the carbon negative NFT drop series.
Yeah, and definitely do that. We need more projects like this in the space. Look, I'm just some guy up here, honestly, from Twitter, just the one that's like willing to be the loudest, I guess, about this. I'm not an expert on being a climate activist. I'm not, developer in that kind of sense. I don't write smart contracts. I'm just out here trying to galvanize people. If you are a developer, if you know how to write smart contracts and put together websites that it would take you, like half a day to put together for a drop or something, and you care about this stuff, please reach out. Please get connected, because we need to kind of like work on this together. And the more folks that are joining in on this, the easier it'll be to flip the narrative a little bit and focus more on the positive things that are happening because of this technology and the artwork, rather than seeing all these headlines about like people getting rugged and things like that.
Yeah, I think we'll end on the fact that we have the tools today to start making an impact here. We have the tools to go and take NFT drops, blockchains, whatever. We can make those things carbon negative. So what's stopping us?
That's it.
Right
Thank you.
on. Right on.